Hello and welcome back to Quarantine with a K, because it's not podcast with a K. I'm your host, Carla with a K, and we are back for another fine Sunday evening by popular demand, as always. For those of you who are new to the show, new to the stream, because I know I have subscribers on here that don't know, I guess, about the podcast other than whenever I post a bunch of episodes at the same time. Uh, welcome. This is what I've continued from my weekly radio show that I do at school, except for now since we're not at school and we're not allowed on campus, we are here via YouTube Live. Um, if you've been here from the start, you saw that we've got the Streamlab overlay set up going. It's pretty cool. I'm excited about it. I'm still going to do the whole background design thing because right now it's just it's just a black screen, so like we have this. But I want to get like some nice backgrounds and stuff, so hopefully I'll get into doing the overlays for that soon, and also into getting something set up so it's not just a webcam of my face and it's more entertaining to look at. But I mean, I feel like we've got a pretty okay setup. This is definitely the biggest adjustment is being on camera as well as y'all listening to whatever nonsense it is that I have to say. But yeah, we out here another week in this life. I've spent a lot more time watching live streams and listening to podcasts for sure, especially now that I'm trying to learn how to do all of this. I've been trying to like pick out what people are doing as they're doing it, but I mean, it's an adjustment. We're having fun. It's fine. um, so last week we had some really good comments and discussions. Now that I have this set up, I still have to test it with another person so I can see about getting live guests on here because that's definitely the most fun part about doing the show. Um, but for the time being, it's just me and the chat. So everyone that's watching is the weekly guest because I can see and respond to everything that you'll have to say in the chat. Um, but last week we talked about companies and stuff taking advantage of like the situation that we're in, like the social distancing, forced quarantine, etc. Oh, the chat works. Ta-da! Okay, I've been having a lot of fun setting this up, and I haven't gotten a chance to test it. So also, welcome to a test run of the new overlay. Um, but yeah, so we were talking about how businesses are taking advantage of it, and one of my friends, and if you watched last week, you saw Javi in the chat. He actually suggested a podcast that someone else is doing, um, and the topic of that episode was, let me see what it was called, because I have show notes. The episode itself was about surveillance capitalism, and it was a really good podcast. I'll include the link in the show notes or in the episode notes or whatever for this video. But it was about surveillance capitalism, and it was really interesting because first of all, that's a phrase that I didn't know before. Um, but shut up, Charlotte. Love the haters, love the fans. So surveillance capitalism. This is when companies and businesses and corporations collect your data and use that to market to you or to, I guess, advertise to you and in any way try to gain your business. And one of my favorite examples and one of the main examples in the episode was Pokemon Go. And this was the connection, and this is what I think prompted Hav to mention this episode to me because we were talking about how internet service providers are offering like a month free or something with the intention of helping people out, but also it kind of seemed like with the goal of gaining new customers. Hi Aldo. Aw, hope you're doing okay. Saludos. So businesses that also have free Wi-Fi, I guess are losing clients. And I made a joke about how back in the day people would sit in parking lots to play Pokemon Go because Pokemon would spawn around like businesses and public parks and libraries, etc. And I made the joke that now it was gonna be about people hanging out in the parking lots just for free Wi-Fi because the Wi-Fi is still on in a lot of places. Like I noticed this because we were driving home, and on the way back, I noticed that I was getting the prompt to connect whenever we went by like McDonald's or like Walmart's or the libraries and stuff. And so in this podcast episode, I didn't know this before, which is crazy because I feel like I live on the internet and I notice a lot of things, but Pokemon Go would apparently like make deals with these businesses, and they would essentially pay to have more Pokemon show up at their locations in attempts to draw customers in. So people would go to like more like summer 2016 basically, right? People went to all of these places and hung out to collect Pokemon or to do gym battles, and little did they know that the reason that they were spawning there was on purpose. I remember my friends and I were talking about it, and our theory was maybe it's just that more Pokemon appear where there's more people. That's why there's not a lot in like smaller towns or like in the woods and stuff. But no, it turns out that this is like deliberate move by businesses, and they would pay to have more Pokemon appear or spawn at their locations to get people in, because if they're playing near like a restaurant or something, right, people would be outside walking around with their friends, and while they're at it, people would be like, oh well, I might as well eat here today, or I might as well buy something at this store that I'm at. And that's crazy to me. I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's not like the most groundbreaking thing, but it's something that did not occur to me at all. And that is, I think, one of the funnier things, like to myself, because my friends and I that played Pokemon Go would do just that. Like we'd go to the store and be like, "Oh shoot, we can collect Pokemon here." And we'd spend more time in the store, and while we're walking around, we're seeing more things, and we would usually end up going in and buying something, even if it was just at Walmart, like just going and buying like a Arizona or something. But that was insane. And another example in this podcast was, I think the example was, oh, Facebook with Cambridge Analytica. And this one was a little bit more interesting because we already talked about this issue before, with them collecting data and targeting ads and it becoming kind of a political ploy, and people arguing about whether or not it was on purpose and whether or not Facebook themselves were pushing it. And the argument here became about whether or not Facebook was responsible for it, because Facebook, and I mean, it's not like Zuckerberg was sitting there being like, all right, I want everyone that lives on this side of the Bible Belt to get this type of ads for the presidential election, right? It was more so that the people that were paying for ads were, hi, Amen. Uh, welcome to the chat. I'm so happy for you. Um, Eamon usually texts me or snaps me commentary as I'm discussing my show, but now you can hang out and participate and be a part of the conversation. Um, okay, so what was I saying? Facebook and ads. Oh, so the businesses are the ones that are, and the people paying for it are the ones that are paying for their ads, because if you've, I don't know how many people do this. I have an art page for my art, and every now and then Facebook will run promos and send you a little notification saying that you can basically they give you a voucher, right, to test run an ad. And so I got one after I think a year of having this page open, and I clicked it. I went through the process, and when you're setting up your ads, it lets you pick your audience, not exclusively, but who you want to tailor it to. So you can tailor it based on age group, based on country, based on common interests, and so that's how ads are targeted. And the issue here became about whether or not Facebook was responsible for the impact of these targeted ads. And this topic to me was super interesting because, as we saw, like, Zuckerberg had to testify to Congress, if I'm not mistaken, over this issue. But it gets into the topic, and we've talked a lot on the show, and I've said this exact sentence. We talk a lot on the show about separating the artist from the art, right? So in this particular topic, we can discuss separating the media from the message, right? So whether or not you saw it on Facebook, like, you did see it, right? Everyone saw some type of ads at some point in their lives that felt super, super directly targeted. It's like you were thinking about something and then all of a sudden you were getting an ad for it. But the thing is, with a platform as big as Facebook, as worldwide as Facebook, and as wide-reaching, um, it's there's gotta be some sort of level of responsibility, right? But at the same time, why should there be? All Facebook said was, here's a platform for you to type something, say something, share it with your friends. And that was that. And then when ads come into play, now there's money involved, and in money there's power, because the more you pay, the longer your ad is running and the wider your reach is. And Facebook will give you an estimate of how many people can see your ad based on how much you're paying, how long it's going to be active, and the range that you set for, like, location, for how many common interests. Like, the more you pay, the more people that will see your ad. Like, I don't think that's a secret. I mean, just think about Super Bowl ads, right? One of the most watched events on television, and a spot of 30 seconds is millions of dollars. So imagine on Facebook, because the Super Bowl is one day, right? And Facebook is, I mean, in your hand every day, right? And say that you pay for your ads to run for a month straight, you're probably going to see that ad more than once. And whenever it's something time sensitive, and whenever it's something as important as a political election, you're going to start seeing ads that directly impact your life. Charlotte said targeted ads come up after talking about it in person, so they got ears everywhere. And they do. I think I mentioned this, if not last week, it might have been on a previous episode. I've been listening to old episodes of the podcast, so forgive me if I get my own episodes mixed up. But I think there was a while when there was an investigation and Facebook noted that, like, the microphone, like, on your phone is usually active, whether it's actually being recorded or not. Like, simply having Siri activated, it's always listening for it, right? So if you get a targeted ad based on something you said, it might actually have been the case. And what's done with your data is something that you don't really have control over, right? Whenever you agree to use a site, you're agreeing that they have access to the information that you're providing. The part where the ads that you get are based on what you listen to, like, I don't think they can legally, well, I mean, unless you agreed to it in the terms and conditions, because none of us read that, let's be real. But it became such a tool for people to use, right? And we've seen this be an issue with other sites. A few years back, I know people were mad at, I think it was Reddit, because Reddit was known for being a place where people could post everything and anything. It was like one of the darker parts of the normal internet, right? But I think there was an issue with because they have different subreddits, which are basically communities and threads of discussion and posts. And one of the communities that was the most mad was the ones that posted about, like, drugs and guns and illegal-ish activity, because they changed it so that the government, I think, could subpoena people's posts if they had access, like, to their accounts and stuff. And so on the one hand, like, you choose what you post on the internet, right? And based on what you post and based on what you interact with, that's how, I guess, your recommendations are set up. But whenever someone else has direct access to information that is tied to you, and it's not just data and it's not just information in an algorithm, that's where people get concerned. And it goes back to the topic of surveillance capitalism, because even though your data is being provided to someone, whenever it's personal and it's directed and it's targeted, and not personal in the sense of like you as an individual, because that's a different I guess situation of like privacy concerns. But whenever you're being targeted like in a group of people that will respond in a certain way, that's that's powerful, right? And that's worrisome whenever people in a certain demographic are getting ads and targeted posts that uh, lead you to take a certain action, to vote a certain way, or to even protest and engage in civil disobedience. Hi Arturo, thanks for watching. Side note, Charlotte, are you lit? Charlotte's not here, so I'm in me and Charlotte's room. My sister is Charlotte, if you didn't know. Charlotte's in the living room. But yeah, surveillance capitalism. It's an interesting topic, and it's one that I'm split on because so for example, most of my social, if not all of my social media accounts are public except for Facebook because the default is set to friends only. But if you if you click on one of my social medias, my links to my other profiles are there. Like even though I have different usernames on everything, like everything is somehow connected. I'm not a hard person to find once you find like my account if you know me, and if you don't, if you stumble upon it, like I've linked to myself. Um, Please don't yell, Charlotte. But that was my choice and that was my deliberate action, right? So if I'm choosing to post something on the internet where nothing is really private, that was my decision. And it's a tricky subject, especially now that everything that we do is it's not necessarily just entertainment, right? Like now we need to stay connected, whether it's just by email, but most people at some point have to use social media for some aspect of their lives. And when it's almost a necessity, it's less about, oh, well, you chose what to post. It's more so like I posted something or I used an application and now they have access to something else. Because like if you use the same email, especially for different things, if you click on something or if you view something on Facebook, you'll get similar ads for or targeted posts for it on Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and like everything. So I really don't know how I personally feel about the topic because, like I said, I'm very aware of the fact that I'm basically signing away the rights to everything I do on the internet the second that I log in and start using any given platform. But do I think it's right? Not necessarily. This is where critical thinking is important and media literacy as well. You have to be able to see things and analyze them and know whether or not you're going to act based on it. And also consider that you're probably getting those ads and targeted posts for a reason. And if you don't mind being just another sheep, if you will, go ahead. If you're playing Pokemon Go near a restaurant and you're hungry, why not eat at that restaurant? You know, they paid for those Pokemon to appear, and you basically are enjoying a free service and then a paid service. Um, but I mean, you could always just pull a Henry David Thoreau, go live in the woods, never interact with anyone. It would fit the rules of social distancing at least. Um, but I don't know. It's tricky. Separating the media from the message is, I think, easier said than done. Because I think that I have a pretty good memory as to what social media platform I saw what information on. Like I know for a fact I see almost all of the news that I see during the day on Twitter, and then on Facebook is where I see people not discussing it, but arguing about it might be the best word, and usually not in the most intelligent or informed way, because Facebook has become very clickbaity. Um, Instagram is usually where I see like little blurbs of news, because I follow a few news pages and they'll just post like quick little excerpts of their stories. So that's when I'll go to like Twitter or YouTube and see the rest of the story. But I don't know. I think it's a super large issue that we only really ever consider in small, immediate, direct ways. But using that as a segue, I kind of wanted to talk about where we get our news from. Uh, Charlotte says she's no sheep, she's the goat. Okay, think what you will. I don't even want to get into this conversation with you right now. Um, what was I saying? Oh, media, where we get our news from. And like I said, I get my news a lot of the times from Twitter. And I saw that Kim Jong-un was dead, maybe? Question mark. Please don't come after me. I hate that I'm scared of the internet now. I don't know if that name's like taboo, like in Harry Potter, where you can't say Voldemort because he immediately knows. Please don't come after me, North Korea. But I saw that, and it was a tweet from TMZ, and TMZ broke the story, and then Jabuki, who is a popular tweeter, also comedian, and writer, posted that TMZ breaks a lot of these stories first, a lot of the times, and there's no way they're not behind it, which was pretty funny. But it's also crazy that a tabloid site is, and a tabloid, like, I guess, network, I don't know, company, whatever, is where a lot of news is broken. And that's not the first incident of it. I think TMZ also got in trouble with, that took way too long to type out, and now we've moved on. What do you mean, amen? I don't know what you're talking about. Um, TMZ breaks a lot of news, and they've gotten in trouble in the past because they've told stories before, like friends and family of like the deceased or impacted have even found out. And of course, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that come with this. Which of course being that TMZ is behind it or has like men on the inside, which I guess is kind of like a different a different word for reporters and journalists. Um, but it's crazy that we get our news from like unofficial sources now, and a lot of people trust it immediately on the spot. And with that comes, I guess, the danger of getting all of your news and information from like one place and one site, because you also get a lot of the same opinions and you kind of fall into echo chambers. Yeah, I don't know what you said. It didn't appear in my chat box statement. Oh wait, Umberto said separating the media from the message is a difficult thing, especially when discussing news, simply because most of us receive our news from the media. Yeah, exactly. And so the topic of echo chambers comes up a lot, I guess, as usual with politics, because people tend to interact with circles that have similar ideas and beliefs to them, or if they seek out the opposing view, it'll be like the extremes on either side, right? And um, I think the echo chamber thing goes further, kind of like Umberto said. A lot of us receive our news from the media. There's not a lot of places, even though like there's different news networks and stuff. A lot of their sources are the same, right? And that's why I like to go to Twitter first, just because with highlights you'll see like the news and then like different sources, different like articles, different videos, different like I guess just people, and even reporters and journalists now like will tweet the news like from their own personal accounts. Um, but there's also that version of an echo chamber in the sense that if you're getting all your news from one place, like you're only getting that perspective on the news, right? And you're only getting the information that's being provided to those particular entities. And we learned in wow, look at me learning in school. We learned in one of my communications classes about different fallacies and different communication theories, and one that's like that stood out to me the most is news or information, I guess, is relayed to like the I guess representatives for each individual group. So I don't remember what it was called. I didn't learn that much apparently, but basically like one source tells the news to like five different people, and then these five different people have like 10 different people that depend on the news from them. And so if you trace it back up, even if everyone on Twitter is talking about something and everyone has an opinion, if you trace back the news sources, it all comes back to like one central point. So it kind of skews what information is shared and what information is known. And then in discussing it, if you're talking about it with people of opposing views from different parts, if you each can trace back the information that you got from the same source, you're kind of still stuck in that same circle and not really getting as broad or different of a perspective as you would have thought or as you would have hoped from the start. And I mean, it's not just political either, it's also with pop culture, and especially with something that I think we talk about a lot here, which is cancel culture, right? If you only ever see like one perspective on a story, that's all you're gonna see. And I was listening to an older podcast, not my own this time, someone else's podcast, and they were talking about a video of there was a protest basically, and it was the one of the kid wearing the MAGA hat and the protesters. It was something, I don't remember what it was. It might have been. I don't want to say it wrong. Sorry, the turtle is. I have a pet turtle. If you guys didn't know, he's here, awake for some reason, and crawling around everywhere, knocking things over. Um, Please sit down. News. Oh, and it's the Native American guy that was beating the drum. And if you saw the original video and the original coverage, it looks like there's this kid, he's like a teenager, right? And he's just like smiling in his face, like shouting back, like as they're both shouting at each other, I think, in a clip of it. And he's like beating the drum and he's just kind of like smiling there, like, and he looks smug, and you see it and you immediately think, like, okay, so red Trump hat, this kid's in the wrong, right? But then whenever you watch the whole video, the kid's like the kid's doing his bit, right? Like he's doing his own protest. But then it's the guy with the drum that comes up to him, and it's like, this is an adult man and this is a teenager. And then when they interviewed the teenager, he said something about like if he walks away, he felt like he was being disrespectful, and if he doesn't smile, people will think he was being rude. But seeing that to me was like one of the more eye-opening situations, because if you know me, you know where I stand on issues dealing with Trump. Not my favorite, to say that in the lightest of terms. But when you see that video, it's like, all right, so maybe the kid was just standing there minding his own business, and then he was brought into this. But then also, like, hearing the kid explain himself, it's like you realize that he's super young, and you realize that he's a teen who has a lot to learn about the world. Because if you think about it from an outside perspective, not in the heat of the moment, not at that age, not in that mindset, for him to stand there smiling makes him look smug. It makes him look like the bad guy, right? Not to make another Harry Potter reference, but it makes it seem like every time that like Malfoy's antagonizing Harry and he knows it, and he's just smirking while Harry gets in trouble with all the professors as usual. But it was just super interesting to see, because I saw that and immediately I was like, yo, these Trump supporters crazy, disrespectful, etc. But then you watch the video and you're like, all right, so this is an instance where they were just each standing there doing their thing, right? And Martha said there's a third party that was never mentioned, which completely changes the story and reason for the confrontation. I feel like I remember hearing about that, but not through the news, just like in comments, like, and Twitter replies, but I never looked into it, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I took the information that was provided to me at face value, and that's it. I saw that, and then I dropped the issue because I was like, yeah, my mind's made up. And then a few weeks later, whenever the second half of that story came out, I was like, yo, that's crazy. I was maybe not wrong, but misinformed, as were the rest of us, because we just saw what we were provided with and made our decision and our judgment based off of that. And then after that, anything that came out after that just felt like discussion and arguments back and forth about who was actually in the wrong, and I was just like, all right, I've seen enough of this story. And that is a not fallacy, a theory as well, where people get tired of a news story and just kind of stop paying attention to it because they're like, well, it's not my problem to deal with, and somebody else is going to deal with it anyway. And we all do that, and we're all guilty of that, which is unfortunate because we really shouldn't. We should definitely pay attention to the news and continue to learn about stories as they develop, not just take them at face value. and that's something that I personally try to work on now that I'm aware of it. Um, but yeah, that's like I think one of the biggest examples I have. And then what had I mentioned before? Oh, cancel culture, right? Like anytime that some celebrity does something or says something dumb, like was it Vanessa Hudgens with the coronavirus thing? Um, I hadn't seen anything about. I don't follow her on anything. I don't really go out of my way to see things on Instagram that are from people I directly follow. I just saw that people were mad at her, that she was making light of an issue, and my first thought was just, okay, so she's rich, she's famous, she's not really feeling the impact of it. She's probably just annoyed and frustrated with the situation. Maybe she was like shooting something and it was canceled, or she was about to go on some sort of like tour or something. And then I finally got like saw the video. I think it was like on the news like on TV, and it's what's the clip of her saying is people are gonna die, so what? And I was like, oh, so she said that. And it kind of ties back to, I don't know how many podcast episodes ago it was, but we talked about the responsibility that comes with being a public figure. And as someone, and she apologized for it later, saying that, she realizes that she can't just be saying things like that. Um, the responsibility that comes with being a public figure, and one of like I was talking about, like the, I guess, representatives of the people, right? And people who, I guess, inform others. Like when you have so many people who follow your every move and see everything you say, you kind of, I mean, you don't have to, right? You're still your own person. You're still just a person. But you have to realize that you do have influence. If even if you don't feel responsible for it, like just know that you do have that influence and that impact. Like even I myself, I can see that like several people are watching this. So everything that I say here and someone's listening to it, if they go and repeat what I said and I was wrong, that comes back to me, that falls back on me. So like for every one of these podcast episodes, even these ones, which is just me sitting in my room making sure my turtle doesn't knock things over, I have like, you can't see, I don't know why I'm pointing, but I have like show notes pulled up. I have like a list of topics I want to talk about and examples that I wanted to mention, and that way if I do learn something that I was wrong about, I can like cross reference this, be like, wait, did I say that? Oh yeah, I did. And also like obviously these are up on YouTube for the foreseeable future. Um, but it is interesting. And then in the descriptions I always put like what we talked about on the show. And whenever I, even just editing them, like I'll listen back to past episodes and not even from that long ago, like from like a week ago, a month ago even, and I'm like, wow, we really said things and we have learned other things. And my opinions changed. Like, hold on, Damon said, I think cancel culture is overstated. I don't think it truly exists because if it did, famous people who've done truly awful things would have lost their platforms by now. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's more so about making sure people uh, are aware, because we can't really hold them accountable. There's no way that we can directly uh, force them to stop saying things or stop thinking a certain way. And it's not like people can get, well, here anyway, in these states, arrested for what they say. Um, Charlotte said someone could easily take a small clip of something you said out of context and cancel you, and others wouldn't take the time to do their research. Exactly. And once such issue of this, I mean, ever since then, he's had his own, like, real significant controversies. But I remember that one of the first times PewDiePie got in trouble, it was something that had gotten taken out of context from a video. And it was very much in, like, the style of it's just a prank, bro. Like, it's something that shouldn't have been published, but it was. But it wasn't as big as people were making it seem. And then afterwards, he had his follow-up downfalls. But I remember that first incident, a lot of people were mad and defending him because it was just like, that's not what that video was about at all. It was actually about the completely opposite thing. Eamon said, anything, I think all anyone can really do is be a responsible consumer of media and have a responsible source of it, since we all have platforms now. Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was gonna say. Last week, I was talking about the the example where I said the thing about the plastic bags, right? If you don't want plastic bags to be used, then stop making them instead of trying to use them to make money because you're actually not like doing anything for the environment. That conversation, and that was in reference to yeah, that was in reference to an episode of the podcast from like the beginning of the academic school year. I think this was from back in September, and I was listening to that episode to make sure it was like good to post and upload. And as I was listening to it, I was like, oh yeah, I think I'd wanted to mention this, and then I just never got around to it because the conversation moved on. So last week when I talked about it, I remember I talked about it, but I also mentioned other things that I had like since I guess not learned, but well, opinions had changed since things that I'd learned from then on, and so it's a cool thing to be able to like know what you thought, and that's a big reason that I like having this show, because you can hear back and see how what you think has evolved as you've grown as a person, but it's also crazy to see how much changes, like, and even if it's just something really small that you learned, like that's insane. And knowing that people heard me like talk about that, and my friends that I was interviewing in that episode, and then their friends heard them, and all of us discussing things, anything that we said during that show most definitely reached other people's ears. And I mean, we can't really, we don't know who was listening. And I mean, also it broadcasts on just live radio, so anyone could have been listening. And so anything that we said kind of can be traced back to us. And that's crazy. Like Charlotte said, someone could take anything that we said out of context or even in context and use that to cancel us even now, which is wild because that was then. No, I did some things, but that's the old me. Eamon said not to be dramatic, but if it came down to a 2020 purge, I must die. Oh my god. I'm not getting into this conversation in this podcast episode. Don't wish death on anyone, that's rude. uh I don't even know how to segue into the next topic. I wanted to use this to have a discussion about pop culture, but we've gone off track a lot. Um I guess this kind of envelops the tone of the show, however. Since we talked about separating the media from the message and artists from the art and cancel culture, etc., we've covered every possible topic that we could hope to cover in an episode like this. But I also wanted to talk about something else that came up in conversation with different friends and different conversations, which was, is talent and skill subjective? Magic words are I don't know enough to have an opinion. Yeah, that's a good quote to live by. My dad always says that to us, and he says that in Spanish, but basically like he basically says like fill your mouth proudly with the words I don't know. If somebody asks you something, just say you don't know. You don't have to have the answers. And if you want to have the answers, be like, yo, I don't know yet, but let me go look it up real quick. Let me go find out, and then we can talk about it. And uh, back in the day when I was a angsty, apathetic teenager, I was like, yeah, but like you can still have a conversation. But now that I'm older and wiser, and also wiser, that's a reference that I think only Charlotte's gonna get. Um, but now I definitely try to live by that, especially with this show, as I mentioned, show notes for accountability. But I want to talk about whether or not skill and talent is subjective. And on this show in particular, I think there's been like 2 or 3 episodes where I've talked about this and where my friends have very passionately discussed this, especially because I do art. We've talked about whether or not art is good, whether or not all art is good, and whether or not that's a subjective topic. And the reason this conversation is coming up is because a couple of days ago I was on the phone with a friend, and we were talking about America's Got Talent and how that show has changed. There's so many seasons of it, and my family used to watch it every night that it was on for I think maybe 2 or 3 seasons. And I personally stopped watching because it would always come down, in these years, it would always come down to a magician and a singer. Not a musician, not anyone playing an instrument or doing anything that was to me particularly impressive, just singing, right? And then a magician. And so in my mind, I was like, all right, so this person just won like the opportunity of a lifetime because they were born with decent vocal cords, whereas this guy has been working for years to do magic tricks and now they've lost it all just because someone else had a pretty voice. What's up with that? And that's the discussion I want to have right now is talent versus skill because it goes further than America's Got Talent, obviously, and also in comparing different people's abilities. Not all of them are quantifiable in the same way. So, for example, singing, right? Like, anyone can learn to sing, right? You can learn how to do scales, you can learn how to identify notes. If you're tone deaf, you can work on it and learn tricks so that you can sing. There's even been instances, and I don't know if it was on American Got Talent, but it was definitely on some reality TV show where there was, I think, a girl who had been born hearing but lost her hearing after she was sick for like I think a while, like, and after she was still young, she wasn't even a teen yet when she lost her hearing, but after a while she decided that she wanted to go back to singing, so she relearned how to sing. She memorized how like she basically turned it into muscle memory as she learned how to make the notes that she needed to reach in order to sing, right? And so like this is to say anyone can learn how to sing, but people with conventionally good voices are usually the ones that make it further, with the exception of certain artists who have a different voice but still in a certain group of I guess vocal qualities to stand out enough but fit in enough to still be considered a conventionally good singer. And so to put that in comparison with even singers that play instruments as they're singing, right? Because a musician will have to learn how to play their instrument, and it comes easier to some people than others, right? But you can still learn how to play an instrument, and it's something that you work at, and it's something that with practice you get better at. And my sister and I did piano lessons, so she can attest to this. We've done music with people who have never opened a book in their lives, but whenever they're playing, they play beautifully and they play by ear. And then there's some people who can sight read like nobody else. And it's crazy to see the difference because if you're not seeing like their process, you're just hearing the music, they're both equally good at it. But there's a different amount of work that goes into it, and there's of course people who don't really need to practice a lot, and we've also seen this because there's a camp that we do in which a part of it is teaching kids music, and there's kids that don't have pianos at home, don't do lessons, but they pick up chords especially super super fast, and once they've learned the chords, putting that to the melody is not as hard, and it sounds so so good. And then you'll have kids that have been doing lessons forever and they can play the melodies, but they can also like learn it by ear, so if they'll hear someone else playing a song, they'll copy it and start doing it. um Umar said talent aids you in learning something, a skill is what you've learned through work. Amen says talent is fun to flex, but skill is learned. Skill means discipline. Exactly. And so whenever you try to compare people's abilities without taking into account other aspects of it, that's wild, especially like I said in a show like America's Got Talent where you're putting people who do completely different things against each other, especially like to me again singers is the biggest example because it's a singer that almost always wins, and it's something that I don't want to say doesn't take as much work because it does. Like being a good singer takes, of course, practice as well. You have to learn how to use your voice without it giving out, without getting tired from it. But to compare that with something that's taken years and years and years and years to build up is crazy. But it comes down to learning styles and the amount of effort put in. Same thing can be said about school and learning material through different teaching styles. That's interesting, yeah, for sure. The way that you learn things and the way that it's taught to you definitely impacts how fast you catch on to it. Um, but I don't know. I think the comparison is crazy, and I don't know how much of it I would say is subjective versus how much of it can even be measured, because if you want to judge someone based on how they play after 5 years of learning how to play an instrument versus someone that's been working at it for 10 years, but during that time, if the person that's been playing for 10 years hasn't practiced as much or put as much work into it as the person that's doing it for 5 years, like, is it a fair comparison? I guess. Hi, Juan. Oh, thanks for tuning in. Juan has been on the podcast before. Stay tuned for his episode to eventually come up. Um, Out here still trying to grind, man. Um, but also, so say that the person that's been playing for 5 years, this is an example that just came to mind, learns songs that sound impressive, right? And the person that's been playing for 10 years has put all of their effort towards learning techniques and like rudiments and like practicing scales, practicing chords, all of that. But the person that's been playing for 5 years learns one song that sounds really, really cool, and that's like their show off song, right? Like it has notes all over the place, they're moving like all over the keys. If you put that person playing that song against someone that's been playing for 10 years and something that they've been learning, you might not know how to uh you might not know enough about music yourself to know the difference. And that's something that I see a lot on these shows as well, and that's something that sucks to see whenever people that you can tell have put in the work get disqualified in comparison to someone that hasn't. For example, there was, and I don't remember, Charlotte, if you're still watching, you might not be, but it might have been America's Got Talent or X Factor, but there was a band called Us the Duo, and they did their song and it sounded super good and super polished, and the harmonies are beautiful, and it's an acoustic song and the acoustic guitar is like live and it's great and it's fantastic. But and the audience like went crazy for it. I don't know if they went on to the next round or not. But I remember the audience went crazy for it and everyone was like going wild, and on Twitter everyone was like hyping them up, and like they got one of the bigger like standing ovations of the night. But I was like, bro, they're already famous. This isn't a new song. This isn't something that they've been doing. And I just want to disclaimer, I love this song and I love their sound in particular. And then it says I remember did they really go to app? That's crazy. Oh yeah, is that how we found them, Charlotte? Through they did a thing on YouTube with Alex and Roy. Alex and Roy are YouTubers if y'all watch YouTube. Now Roy goes under Guava Juice. Um, but this song was already famous. It had been featured in the movie The Book of Life. And I heard the song and I was like, dude, this song already existed. This isn't what? And I remember watching that episode and I was like, imagine them doing this song that they've been playing for years, dude. This is a song that they've already like published, they've already gotten money from, they've already had featured in a movie, and imagine them taking that opportunity from someone that was doing that show for the exposure to gain more recognition, to showcase the talent that they've been working at. That's insane. And they didn't go very far, I don't think. And that's not to say I was like happy about it, but I did feel less bad seeing them disqualified than I would have seen somebody else that had been working at this for ages and never having gained any recognition for their work, right? For their talent, for their skills. Where it says maybe the audience simply isn't the correct one. It boils down to what the audience thinks as well as whether an audience exists for the individual and their skill. Right, exactly. There has to be someone to appreciate that in particular also, just because whenever you understand the work that goes into a craft, I feel like you can appreciate it better for sure. Like you can see something and know it's impressive, but whenever you know the amount of work and dedication it takes, then I mean, someone that's done like one carving class is gonna have a different opinion of like seeing Michelangelo's sculptures than somebody who's never even touched uh, carving tools in their lives, whereas someone that does it like for their job, like I feel like you notice different little things and it helps you appreciate it. Um, Charlotte said oh yeah, we'd been heard of them. It was interesting to the meeting. That was crazy. Yeah, no matter where you are, I'll be there. Eamon's gonna marathon my whole channel. All right, let me know what you think of every one of these rambling episodes, because I just realized there's 5 minutes left of the hour, and I've talked a lot about nothing, and mostly to myself, but also y'all in the chat. But yeah, doing something gives you a better appreciation of the craft, which is why I still think that even though measuring somebody's skill, measuring someone's talent can be subjective, there's also there's got to be, I guess, a different limit that we all set for ourselves and what we think of as good versus bad versus impressive and not impressive. But there's definitely things that are inarguably significant accomplishments, I guess, if you can call them that, or milestones in the progress of how far someone's gotten in that craft, right? I think right now music's been a good example because I mean, there's so many shows on TV, like we've all seen them. Like America's Got Talent, I think it's just the best example of it because there's people doing so many different things. Like there's dog trainers going up against magicians, against stuntmen, against musicians. There's comedians, and they all have to compete against each other. But if there was to be a show on each individual skill, there would be a lot of shows. But I guess all of this is to say that my hot take for the night is that singers shouldn't be allowed on America's Got Talent. There's American Idol for a reason. There's X Factor for a reason. There's even, is The Masked Singer still a thing? I don't think I ever watched it because it was on TV while I was at school, which means I didn't really. I mean, we had a TV thanks to one of our roommates, but I never got around to watching that show in particular. But that was just famous people trying to guess who the other famous people singing were, right? Like, there's a lot of singing shows, and for singers to be taking up space on America's Got Talent, get out of here. um, Nothing against singers, of course. Just on that show in particular, it was frustrating to see. I just remember the year that I watched. I was in like middle school or like early high school, but I was so heated because the magician that I had been rooting for from the start got disqualified for a singer who I personally did not think was that great of a singer, other than they just had a decent voice. But yeah, long story short, art is subjective. Talent, I guess, is what's not. Skill can be subjective. That I think I'll yield on, because that'll be based on your own understanding uh, of a craft and how much you know about it. But talent, I think we all know. Like if you've got it, you've got it. Charlotte said, in that case, dancers shouldn't do AGT either because there's shows like So You Think You Can Dance. I mean, I'm not arguing that. Yeah, there's shows for it. But with dancers, I think it's different because there's not as many shows, are there? And I think the biggest show is Dancing with the Stars, and there's different styles of dance. Um, it's gonna be a bunch of magicians. What's wrong with that? There's shows for just magicians as well. I'm not saying like separate all of the different skills. I just think it's interesting to see because singers almost always win. Messiah said T-Pain won the first season. That's crazy. I didn't know that. um, See, Eamon agrees. Singers should be on a different show. But yeah, talent. If you have talent, you have it. Singers, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of shows for them. What other morals of the story have we encountered? Separating the media from the message is easier said than done. The audience matters. Charlotte sounds a little bitter, according to Nada. What you got against magicians? Charlotte secretly wanted to be a singer and a dancer all this time. That's where all of that's coming from. Just playing devil's advocate. Charlotte is an Aries. if you've missed your weekly dose of astrological nonsense. Charlotte's a theater kid and an Aries. No wonder she's so heated about this discussion. If you didn't know, if you missed Charlotte's introductory episode, Eamon's also an Aries. Uh, Aries are combative. They like to argue. They like to fight. I've kind of taken a step back from the whole astrology thing, haven't I? That's crazy. Who would have thought? Not me. But also, like, is astrology real? That's a topic for another time. But looking at the timer, it is almost midnight, which means we are almost out of time. And as our time draws to a close, I would like to once again, as always, say thanks a million for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks to all y'all in the chat. I very much enjoy this discussion, and I really do like having the live chat feedback. This might be something that we have to incorporate in the fall, because that would be super super cool. And I know these episodes from Juan, who you guys have seen in the chat tonight, live streamed his episode. A couple of other people have also streamed their episodes, and getting people's feedback during the show is always cool. Like, even just like my friends texting me during the show always helps propel the conversation forward. So if I don't get this Streamlabs thing figured out by next week so that I can get guests in here like face-to-face live, then we'll continue our weekly chat-driven discussions. Consider yourselves all official guests of the podcast. Add that to your resumes and portfolios if you would like to, because I have the authority to to give y'all that. Charlotte said astrology is a scam, but Carl isn't ready for that discussion. I never said it was real or fake, bro. I'm just chilling. I just said I like it for fun. And you can't deny, considering that you came in here and decided to argue with me, that the Aries thing isn't completely true. Humberto said if it's not tangible or observable, it ain't real. Oh, I can't see oxygen. I don't know what that means, so you tell me. Alright, this has been real. It's been fun. I'll see you guys next week, same time, same channel. Have a good night. Peace.